master teacher of Vedantu for social studies. Today we're going to talk about the marathon, and in this session we're going to talk about political science. So as you guys know, we have 8 chapters in total in political science, and those 8 chapters start basically, if you talk about those 8 chapter in social studies for class 10th, you are I would say, blessed and privileged to the next level, because anyway you don't have to cover all those 8 chapters. Starting with power sharing, the second chapter, that's federalism, then democracy and diversity, the fourth chapter being gender, religion and caste. Fifth, you've been exempted, like you don't have to study that, that's popular struggle and movements. And the sixth chapter, political parties. Seventh chapter being outcomes of democracy, and the eighth chapter being challenges to democracy. So talking about these 8 chapters, I've decided to pick up all the important questions. So we're going to start with the first chapter, that's power sharing. So let's start our question set with the first chapter. So I've decided to concentrate on the core topics so that you get a good grasp of the chapter and cover all the important questions simultaneously. Maybe 1 mark question, maybe 3 mark, or maybe 5 marks. So let's cover them, in an order, so that you get a good idea in this limited time span of this video of what are the important questions that you can expect and how you can revise the important topics from every chapter. So let's get started. You guys have to be quick. You have to think. You have to act very quick in answering the question. So let's have the first question right here. That is, after independence, Sri Lanka witnessed supremacy of which community? Easy question. I know most of you can answer this question. The very first point that you have to take care is, see, Sri Lanka attained its independence in 1948, and I know you know the answer. It's very easy. It is Sinhala, Sinhala, sorry, Sinhala community, which it got supremacy at this time. Now, what if they ask you a question that, can you talk about by the way, this question was asked also. They did ask it in 2015. So can you talk about 3, let's say, majoritarian measures taken by Sri Lankan government to ensure that they sort of establish Sinhala supremacy? So I'm going to give you 3 important points that you guys can take care of. The very first point was, like, in 1956 they passed an act. An act was passed which established that, Sinhala was the official language which is to be used in Sri Lanka, disregarding all the minority groups, that's the Tamils. So this, passing of this act sort of created a feeling of alienation among the minorities in the country, in Sri Lanka, especially when I talk about Tamils. So this is the first thing that you have to remember, that is 1956 act. This started, Tamils started to feel that they left out from the society. Second important point you can talk is, the government started the policy, adopted and started formulating government policies that actually favored the Sinhala's people. For example, making reservation in jobs, for universities, and this sort of made Tamils feel that they've been left out. Third important point here is, Sri Lankan government, this, further proclaimed that Buddhism is the main religion of the state, and we won't sponsor any other religion for that matter. So I hope you guys are in a position to answer these 2 parts. The very first question that we discussed here is, after independence, Sri Lanka witnessed supremacy of which community? So the answer is right here, like I told you, 1948, Sri Lanka witnessed supremacy of Sinhala community. Then we discussed about one more question. We talked that 3 majoritarian measures, Act of 1956, favored and gave reservation to Sinhala people, and Buddhism declared as the major or most important religion. So I guess we should try one more question on this chapter. So can you probably, what if a question comes at 5 mark question, that can you bring out sharp contrast when it comes to the model that was adopted by Belgium that we're just going to discuss, or maybe by the Sri Lankan government. I'm going to give you quick 5 to 6 points. See, when a question comes like this, that you have to declare, come up with a contrast, maybe Belgium, maybe Sri Lanka, please start your answer with an introduction, which basically means you can state that, see, both of these countries, they were basically, both were democratic countries, yet they were very diverse in their social setup. So both the countries have adopted very different policies or very different approaches when it comes to power sharing. I hope this is good to go. This introduction makes sense. Now kickstart your answers. For example, the very first point that you're going to talk about is, Belgium is that ideal example of democratic setup. It adopted the policy of accommodation, of social, of ethnics division. So they sort of bought that. On the other hand, if I talk about Sri Lanka, it also adopted democratic setup, but followed majoritarianism. I hope this is clear. Okay, let's try to move to the next point. See, I would say Belgium model, uh, under the Belgium model of democracy, power was shared among the different ethnic groups. Whereas if I talk about Sri Lanka, that was not the case. It was only and only Sinhala community that was in majority. So yes, here the power was shared. In this case, no, it was not. Sinhalas were only the sole majority at this time. Next important thing that you can add is, in Belgium, see, both the groups, they were given equal share in the working of the government. But if I talk about Sri Lanka, that was not the case. In Sri Lanka, minority community was sort of isolated. They were not given their due rights. Coming back to Belgium. See, Belgium's constitution was actually amended 4 times. Like they amended the constitution like 4 times. And then they arrived to the final draft. But if I talk about Sri Lanka, no. Majoritarianism, it led to the civil war for 20 long years. That's a long, long time. And guys, can you guess the official language, official religion of Sri Lanka? Good, it is Buddhism. So I hope you have got a clear picture of what this chapter is all about. Okay, now let's proceed to the next question right here. Highlight the measures adopted by Belgium Constitution. Now, talking about Belgium Constitution for prevention of conflicts in Belgium. I guess if you even concentrate on, the important points, you're going to make sense out of it. So the very important point right here is, see, try to give a good introduction. When you have an answer like this, let's say this question is asked for 5 marks, or let's say for 3 marks, and it was asked in 2012. So please ensure you give a good introduction. Like Belgium leaders recognize the existence of, regional differences. They did appreciate that, okay, we have regional differences. They came up with this fact, and there is cultural diversity, and they did amend their constitution for 4 times in a row. So what steps did they took up? For example, they decided that we're going to have equal number of ministers. Like I've written here, equal number of ministers. The government of Belgium has equal number of ministers, may it be Dutch or may it be French speaking people. So this has been done to give, I would say, equal power to majority or the minority language speaking group. Second thing that you can talk about is setting up a community government. Yes, it's important we talk about the community government. That's the third kind of the government that's named as community government, that was set up in addition to the central and the state government. So this government had, power regarding all those cultural, educational, or maybe the linguistic issues. So this government, it comprised of members of all the communities, may it be Dutch, may it be French, or may it be the German speaking. Then we can also say, like, there was fair power share. I've talked about this point. Then there was fair power share. That means the two regions of the government, or the country, they were sharing equal power. And then finally there was equal representation. May it be French speaking people, may it be Dutch speaking people, they were given equal representation in the government. I hope you guys are pretty clear of what we've decided. I'll go back so that you can revise it quickly. First point, equal number of ministers. Second point, we talked about setting up of community government. Then there was fair share of power, and finally equal representation. So on that note, I guess we can talk about one more important question, and that important question is, what if? You can expect this question, by the way. You can really expect this question. Now, what if they ask you any two reasons? That's a crux of the chapter. Any two reasons why power sharing is desirable. Yes, there can be many reasons. You have to give an introduction. Please give an introduction that there can be many reasons as to why, it's important to have the concept of power sharing. That's very, very important. That's a basic thing. So two reasons that we have to talk about as we go on. Number one, you guys know, it is the prudential reason. So see, when you have a question like this, try to give a good introduction and then introduce, okay, we have two basic crux or two basic reasons why we need this power sharing. So there can be many reasons for power sharing in a democracy, but following are the two sets that we're going to talk about. Number one being prudential. So let's talk about prudential. Prudential means it sort of helps to reduce the conflict between the different social groups. So if there's conflict, there's less of conflict. That means it is good way to establish stability of political power, or maybe ensure that there is no social conflict that might often lead to violence and political instability. So these are the two important points that you can highlight. In prudential, reduce conflict. Second, ensure stability. Now, the second outcome or the second reason as to why power sharing is important is the moral reason. That power sharing is, yes, the very spirit of democracy. That means the concept of democracy is a system of government. Why spirit? Because it's a system of government that is by the people, for the people, of the people, which emphasizes on the distribution of power among the people. Second important point that you can talk is that people should be consulted on how they are supposed to be governed. That is very, very important to ensure that people are consulted, they are a part of the government, and they actually run the government, they help in the functioning of the government. That is what you're supposed to take. I hope we've covered pretty much everything except for the concept. What if somebody asks you what is majoritarianism? What is majoritarianism? See, like it was the case of Tamil Nadu, it is a concept that signifies a belief. There's a belief that one major community or the major community should be able to rule the country in whichever way it feels like. So it's like declaring supremacy of one major community over the other. That is when we talk about power sharing, sorry, majoritarianism. I hope this is clear to each one of you. So we've discussed so many questions from this particular chapter, that's power sharing. I don't think you're gonna face any problem. Moving on to the next chapter, we're gonna talk about, let's say, federalism. Let's choose question from federalism. Okay, we even discussed about power sharing is desirable. So let's have the options. Let's go through the options once again. Prudential reasons, we did talk. Conflict is reduced, stability is ensured. Then we did talk about moral reasons, the spirit of democracy, and also the people get an opportunity to be consulted. So let's proceed to the next question. Okay, guys, do you know how many seats are reserved for women in the local bodies? Yes, you guys are absolutely correct. It's 1/3 of the seats that are reserved for women in local bodies in India. Okay, what if somebody asks you to explain the vertical division in power sharing? What comes to your mind? Think, tell me. Of course, there's horizontal. I'll tell you about horizontal, but I don't know. Sorry, let me write it once again. So horizontal is legislative, executive, and judiciary. What about vertical, guys? Can you tell me something about vertical? Yeah, so I'm getting good answers. See, I'll tell you. The power that is shared among different levels of the government is known as vertical distribution of power. So basically, it involves the higher and the local level of the government. So these can be like union government, it can be state government, it can be local government. But when I talk about India, so in India, we have union government that's at the highest level. India has, the Indian constitution has laid out clearly the distribution of power at different levels. So there is division of power. It's further extended to a level, below the state government. That is known as, what you call it, as municipal corporations or municipalities. And in panchayati, in rural areas, we call it as panchayati raj. So each level of the government exercises its own power. There is, I would say, no specific system of checks and balances. It's like each level has its own power, its own area of jurisdiction, and no level can interfere into each other's functioning. So such an arrangement, like vertical arrangement, it ensures that there is deepening of democracy, like we respect each other for the same. And who is, on that note, I want to ask one more question if you guys are attentive and in a position to answer. Can you tell me, this was asked in 2015 also, like which is the official post? I'll repeat my question. Which is the official post of chairperson of a municipal corporation? Yes, it is mayor. I hope it's easy. So let's proceed to the next question on that level. On that, okay. Compare the federations of coming together and holding together. I guess it's a very important question. So let's see what we have. I'll first come and talk about it. See, coming together, I'll first give you examples. It can be USA. You can talk about Australia. It'll help you revise. And then you can also talk about Switzerland. But when you have holding together, you can talk about India, you can talk about Belgium, you can talk about Spain. I guess it's very, very important to give examples. Rest, you guys know that, in coming together of federation, independent states, they come together on their own to form a bigger unit. That is, you come together. Whereas in holding together, a large country, a very big country, it decides to divide the power between its units or between its constituent units, between the constituent units and the national government. Second point that you can talk is, the main aim of this federation that is coming together is to pool sovereignty, that is independence, and maintain a separate identity at the same level. Whereas if you talk about holding together, the scenario is somewhat different. In this type of federation, there is an absence of pooling together of sovereignty. It's like maintaining, identity of the nation. Third important point that you can talk is, in coming together, all the separate state, or you can say constituent states, they usually have equal power and enjoy certain amount of autonomy. But if you talk about holding together, I don't think that's the case. Under this holding together, the central government tends to become more powerful. I know you guys know all these points, so let's have a quick revision. Under this, independent states, they come together. Here it's like the government decides to share. Holding together is like it divides the power according to the requirement. All the constituent units, they basically have equal power, whereas in this case the central government tends to have more power. Then we talked about the examples also. So on that note, how many lists do we have in India? How many lists? Okay, yes, there are three lists. Let me note down those three lists if you remember the points. For the legislative power, if in India I talk about the legislative powers, it's divided between the center and the state. Just a quick revision. So first list is the union list. Let's write down the important subjects that we have. For example, there is defense. Then there are foreign affairs. Then we have banking, currency, and finally communication. So all this come under the jurisdiction of union government. Second, you have state government. So what is there in state government? You have police, you have trade, you have commerce, then you have agriculture, then you have irrigation. They all come under the jurisdiction of state. And finally, let's talk about the concurrent list where you have education, then you have trade unions, marriage, adoption, or maybe forest, all come under this category of concurrent state. I hope this is pretty clear to each one of you. Okay, and one more question I want to talk about when we are talking about this. Can you just tell me, 5 provisions of Indian Constitution that have made India sort of a federal country? I'll repeat my question. Any 5 provisions that in the Indian Constitution that have made India a federal country, or sort of full-fledged federation? Okay, like many of you are telling me that we'll start. See, it's important that you start with the definition of federation. So federation is a country in which the powers are divided between the union and its constituent parts. And India is an example of, is it holding together or is it coming together? Yes, it is. India is an example of holding together a federation. So when a country decides to create its constituent units, whereby power is divided, duties are divided, so that is all. Now 5 provisions, let's start with it. So we have 2 or more levels of government. Like we have a federal system where we have different levels, may it be union, may it be state government, may it be local government. That probably implies that there the government administration among the is divided among different units. Second important thing is we have 3 lists like we just discussed. Third important thing is there is a rigid constitution. Yes, by which I mean to say that the government of India is governed by a constitution of India and considered the supreme power of the country. So it is not easy, to amend the constitution. In order to ensure that you amend the constitution, you need to involve the states, and that's not an easy task. Then you can say that there are 2 houses, that is that there is bicameralism in India, so that no decision is taken in haste. Then you have bicameralism means you have 2 houses, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. And then finally you have financial autonomy. And the last point you can talk about is independence of judiciary. So adding to this, whatever we've talked about, I want to add one more thing, that government made special efforts in decentralization of power after 1992. What is it all about? What was the main aim? So the very first important thing for decentralization that was made after 1992 was it was made constitutionally mandatory to hold elections, like regular elections at local level. It was very, very important. Second important thing, seats were reserved for scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, and other backward classes. Third important point, 1/3 seats were reserved for the women. Fourth important point, an independent institution, that is State Election Commission. It was given the task that you need to ensure that the elections are conducted at the local level. And finally, the state government was required to share power and revenue with the local bodies. I hope I've covered pretty much everything. Is everybody clear till here? So giving you 1 minute to revise whatever I've made you, whatever we've talked about. So here you go. 5 provisions. Then we talked about decentralization, the steps of decentralization after 1992. I hope this much is clear. So on that note, let's proceed to the next chapter, that is the third chapter. The question from this is, which university has recently, or maybe it recently as in 2005, it installed the statue of Tommie Smith and John Carlos in its campus? Anybody who can come up with this answer? Tell me, it's an important question. Okay, I'll give you the answer. So it is St. John's State University in California, USA, that installed their, came up with their statue in 2005. So guys, if I ask you this question, since you guys are pretty much clear on the idea, so can you tell me one impact of migration? Yes. So it turns a homogeneous country into a multicultural country. That's pretty much easy for you to understand. And can you talk about Netherlands? Like we are talking in this chapter. So can you talk about Netherlands with reference to cross-cutting of social division? Like what were the 2 groups which were involved in the cross-cutting? Like there is cross-cutting. I'll just take up that question. Yes, there were Catholics and there were Protestants. There was cross-cutting. That means both these communities could be equally rich or equally poor. That does not mean that Catholics are always supposed to be rich and Protestants are always supposed to be poor. Cross-cutting means you can be equally rich and equally poor at that time. Cool? So I want to discuss one more question, that what action was taken against or maybe taken by International Olympic Association against those three players. Like one of the name is right here, second name is right here, and I'll tell you the third name is Norman Peter. So because they spoke against, whatever injustice they were facing. So Carlos and Smith, these two people, they were held guilty. These two people right here, they were held guilty of violating the spirit of the game, by making a very strong political statement. So very important point, both were declared that you are guilty. So their medals were taken back. And because this person, he supported both of them, so this person, he too suffered for this action. So he was not included in the Australian team in the next Olympic. Is everybody clear till here? Okay. See, I have this question that might come across in the paper this time, that every social difference, whenever there's a social difference, it does not lead to social division. Like, do you think you agree with this statement? Can you justify your answer? So I'll put my point. See, no, I would say no, not all the social differences, lead to social divisions. It sort of depends on social and political circumstances, whether or not a social difference will lead to the social division of the country. A combination of social differences with all the other differences sort of cumulatively decide whether or not a social difference will get converted into division. So a lot of things come into play. For example, let's say if I combine the concept of race with economic backwardness, this would constitute that there's a social difference that might even lead to social division. I hope you're getting the concept. That, for example, you combine the concept of race and economic backwardness, that would probably constitute that, okay, there's a social difference. But do you really think it would lead to a social division? This question would depend on how political parties respond to it. It varies from place to place. While language or religion may be a form of social difference, but that might not lead to social division in the society. For example, we just talked about the case of Belgium. Even though there is linguistic form of social difference, that does not mean, it led to social division in the society. Clear? Okay, guys, you remember the year in which Mexican Olympics were held? Yes, it is in 1968. This is a quick question that came across. So, Mexican Olympics, it took place in 1968. Okay, moving on to the next question, that is right here. Explain overlapping social differences. So this is very important. See, overlapping of social differences, that means a lot of factors come head on one over the other, and that sort of creates a bias in the society. So let me address this, and then I'll show you the answer, what the answer can be. See, overlapping of social differences, it occurs when some social difference overlaps with another social difference. For example, there is economic, there is religion, so all this come under the same loop. They come under the same loop. So situation of this kind can actually lead to social divisions. When one kind of social difference becomes more important than other, and people start to feel that they belong to different communities because they're associated with specific characteristics. Now, for that matter, let's take the example of blacks and whites in United States or Dalits in India. United States becomes the center of that social division. Why? Because blacks, they tend to be more poor, they are landless, and they often face that injustice and indiscrimination. Even in our country, let's talk about India. Dalits, they tend to be poor, they tend to be landless, and we often see them facing injustice, indiscrimination. So overlapping differences create possibility of deep social divisions and tension. Whereas if let's talk about cross-cutting also. Here I'll highlight about or talk about cross-cutting. So when there is cross-cutting, it means, it occurs when social differences cross each other. Doesn't mean that Dalits have to be poor. It can be the general section also that can be poor, that cannot have a good educational background. So when cross-cutting differences occur with social differences, they sort of cross-cut one another. So it is difficult to pit a group of people against another. This means that the group that share a common interest on an issue are likely to be different, on different issues. For example, let's talk about Northern Ireland. So in this case, the class and the religion, they sort of overlap each other. If I talk about Catholics, if I talk about Protestants, Catholics tend to be poor. They might have suffered discrimination at this time. Whereas if I talk about the case in Netherlands, class and religion, sorry, in Northern Ireland, you can see, class and religion sort of overlap. Northern Ireland is the case example of overlapping. But if I talk about Netherlands, this is the case where you can see the case of cross-cutting. That means the Catholics and the Protestants, they can be equally rich and poor for that matter. I hope I've answered that question. Okay, so let's see what the answer is. Here you go. This is what we discussed. Differences, they sort of overlap each other in overlapping and create a very difficult situation. Whereas we also talked about, cross-cutting, where there's less tendency that, situation might get out of hand. There is less of issues associated with it. But that's not the case in overlapping. I hope you guys have got the point and what I'm trying to say in this case. Cool? Everybody's read this? The blacks, like I gave you the example of the blacks or maybe the Dalits in India. So it's one and the same. Okay, let's move to the next question, that is, explain with examples different forms of social differences. We've just discussed in detail. Like it's one of them is overlapping and the other one is cross-cutting. So overlapping social differences might lead to division in the society if it's not addressed the right way. Whereas cross-cutting is sort of, there's the differences are there's sort of over, they cut across each other. So there's less possibility that people might face discrimination or might feel left out for that matter. So we've discussed it pretty much. And guys, by the way, what if I ask you what is a homogeneous society? Yes, it's a society that has the similar kind of people, where there's no significant ethnic differences and members do share a common culture. So nowadays, I would say homogeneous societies, they've undergone a rapid change. Why? Because there's influx of people. So let's talk about the case of Germany or maybe Sweden. So we had homogeneous societies, but they are also becoming more or more multicultural because a lot of people are coming. There's a lot of influx of the people coming into those countries. And what do you think, guys? What is the main base of social division in our society? Like if I talk about India, yes, it's caste, it's religion, and yes, it's gender. So these are the main reasons why we have those differences in our society. Cool. Okay, so let's proceed to the next question on that note. Okay, describe 5 ways in which women in India are still discriminated against, or maybe they still feel oppressed. Can you talk about it? So before you address this question, can you tell me any two, like we'll move to this question, any two measures, this was asked in 2016, to check casteism in India? Okay, number one being the spread of education. There's a lot of spread of education. Second being economic equality. Then third, you can also talk about abolition of all those or maybe some sort of political reforms taken by the government. For example, they're not based on caste nowadays. And also the main aim of educational institute is to give up the concept of this casteism. Now, and what if I ask you on this note, what if I ask you this question, that describe any 5 ways in which women in India are still discriminated? So let's talk about it. Literacy rate, like it's like very high difference. There's a huge gap when we talk about the literacy rate of men and women in India. So we can still feel that there is a lot, we have to go a long way. Second important point is like literacy rate. Then you can talk about the sex ratio, like how women, we have just 540 females per 1,000 males. So there are sex abortive abortion tests that are taken, that take place. And women face discrimination when it comes to, they did basically unpaid or maybe underpaid for the job that they do. So yes, I would say gender division is, there is a big issue when it comes to gender division in India. Why? Because in Indian society, why I'm talking about this is, in Indian society, gender division is taken as a socially constructed basis. It's like socially it's there, and you have to differentiate between the roles played by men and the women. So I can say that there is, sexual division of work that has been there in the mindset of the society. Because of this, the women face discrimination, and yes, they have been a victim of patriarchal system. Now, I mean to say, even after adopting the concept of maybe equality, liberty, we lack that, practical approach. So it is therefore necessary that political mobilization, yes, I'll stress again, it's important that political mobilization helps to improve women's role in public life. Political parties should come together to frame policies that have equal representation for the women. Or maybe, they should be allowed to take part, encourage them to take charge of day-to-day affairs. That develops a sense of maturity and responsibility. Okay, now let's discuss one more question, like sorry, the next part, that is they face domestic violence, and there is female feticide that we go in for. So coming back to the points once again, it's literacy rate, Then we talked about the sex ratio. Then we talked about unpaid work, they're not paid up to the mark. Then there is, oh, sorry. Then there is domestic violence, and then finally we have female feticide. I hope I've answered that question. Okay, so let's, on that note, we have a similar question, like three constitutional provisions that make India a secular state. Secular means the country does not have a religion of its own. This was again asked, I guess, in last year exam, also in 2011 also. See, I'll first tell you what you are supposed to write. Constitution in India does not give any special recognition to any religion. So yes, there is no state. State means the religion of the country. So there is no state religion in India, unlike Christianity in America, Buddhism in Sri Lanka, or a Muslim religion that is followed in Pakistan. Second important point is, Indian constitution has clearly put a ban on any social discrimination on the grounds of religion. That means you cannot, no state religion, no discrimination. Then, according to the constitution, the state cannot intervene. It cannot, come and finger point on the matters of religion. It has to ensure that there is religious equality. So there is religious equality. And last important point is, every individual, every community have the right to practice, profess, and propagate their own religion. This is the fundamental right given in our constitution. Good to go? Okay, so let's see what the answer is. Does not have any state religion. We just talked about it does not have any state religion. Then they're given, it's practice. They're given the right to practice, propagate any religion or profess any religion. Then in Constitution of India has put a ban that they cannot discriminate on the grounds of religion, and the state cannot actually intervene in issues related to religion. Okay, I guess you're pretty much on the same page, and we can jump to the next question, that is three components of political parties. I guess it's very easy that we have two-party system. Either you have one party, either you have two-party, or you have multi-party system. If we talk about various party system, so India did opt for multi-party system. Because why did India opt for multi-party system? Guys, why I am covering, different aspects when I put up a question right here, so that I can cover every important thing and you don't lose on anything, or any question for that matter. So India opted for multi-party system because of its social and geographical diversity. So in such a diverse country, I think it's very difficult for even two or three parties that cannot absorb all the differences. So that is why we did opt for multi-party system. I hope this is clear to each one of you. Okay, so answering this question, that three components of a political party. So the very first component is going to be its leaders. The second component is going to be its active members, and the third one is going to be its followers. I think it was a pretty easy question, but what if they ask a question that what are the, let me write it here, that what are the three, let's talk about three only, three challenges that you feel our political parties face. Easy question. I know. See, I would say the political parties, they are the very, very essence. This is the introduction that you have to give. The political parties, they are the essence of democracy. So it is, natural that they can often be blamed for the failure of any policy. We anyway blame the political parties if anything goes wrong. So mostly the political parties face the challenges that in their working area. How do they face it? Number one, there is lack of internal democracy. So they lack internal democracy. That means, political parties face the problem of internal democracy. That is, they do not hold organizational meetings. They do not conduct regular internal elections. The membership of the party is, not fairly registered. Like any person can come up and, leave the party. And also, all the members except the top leaders are not included in the decision making. So these are the common problems. Second important problem is about the dynastic succession. That means, this is another challenge that most of our political parties face. The topmost posts, they are always controlled by the members of the family, which is very unfair for the other members. Yes, it is. Since open and transparent functioning is lacking, so there are very few chances that, an ordinary worker can rise up to the top level. Third important point that you need to focus is money and muscle power. Now, what about money and muscle power? That means there's a growing role of money and muscle power nowadays. Elections are focused mainly at winning, they focus on winning at any cost. Maybe using muscle power, maybe making use of the money. So they try to select or nominate those candidates who can actually raise money or provide muscle power, to be honest. And sometimes wealthy people and big companies also get involved, in the democratic politics for their own interest. And they sort of try to influence the decision making process. That's very true. And even I'll tell you, parties support criminals who can probably win the elections. Then next point you can talk is there is absence of meaningful choice. Yes, by which I mean to say, in the present scenario, there is no ideological difference among the political parties. So do not provide, so that sort of does not provide a meaningful choice to the voters at any cost. Those who vote, they see, it's just the functioning that's different. The people cannot elect different leaders because it's the same set of leaders that keep shifting from one party to the other. So anyway, it's going to be the same. So that is what I wanted to talk. And since I've talked about political parties, so I want to highlight what political parties are. So it is an association. You can say political parties is basically an association or a volunteer group of people who come together to contest elections, hold power in the government. Is everybody clear till here? Okay, so let's proceed to the next question that we have. Let's have one more last question on this. That can you suggest some ways that can bring up some reforms in the political parties? Let's say somebody asks you about reform in reform for the in the functioning of political parties. Okay, the first one is like we discussed about the demerits. You can talk that it's important to have internal, affairs being regulated, or internal elections. So yes, internal affairs, you need to regulate them. A law should be made so that you regulate the internal affairs of the political parties. It should be made compulsory for the political parties to maintain a registered of their members, to follow their own constitution, or maybe have an independent authority. This is one of the reforms. Second is, it's important to have state funding. We discussed about the muscle power and use of money. So state funding, that is, there should be a state funding of election, that like the government should, the country should sponsor it. The government should give money to the parties to support their, election expenses, to avoid any sort of corruption. Then you can talk about, there should be ban on political parties that are based on religion and caste. That means the election commission should ban those political parties which are formed on the basis of religion or caste. Clear these 3 points? Next, you have to ensure there is women participation. You give at least 1/3 of the tickets, they're given to the women. And last that point you can talk about is pressure of public opinion. So that means the political parties can be reformed. They should be reformed if people sort of put a pressure on them. That's very, very important, and it can be done. Trust me, it's possible. It can be achieved, through all the petitions, through the propaganda, through agitation, making use of pressure groups and media. I hope this is clear to each one of you what reforms you can probably expect in political parties. Okay, so on that note, let's see the next question, that is, explain any two institutional amendments that have made by different institutions to reform political parties and their leaders. So we just talked about, but we talked in a different context. So here we can answer that, okay, there is an anti-defection law. There's an institution, that is, the law has ensured that, the person who gets elected for the party does not switch his seat after the election. So that sort of law has been put in place, that is known as anti-defection law. Then we've also ensured that, they file an affidavit regarding their record of how much, if they're having any property, if that has a record about their property, their education, if they have any criminal record. That affidavit is very important. And of course, ITR, we're trying to make it mandatory that they file income tax returns, so that we get to know how much of the money they are spending and in which way are they spending. Okay, so I guess pretty much easy. We talked about what is meant by a political party, association or a voluntary group of people who come together to contest election and hold power in the government. So they sort of agree on some policies and programs. I hope this is clear to each one of you. Okay, so let's have the next, that a democratic government is the legitimate government. You have to support this statement. Let me see if you can answer this. Okay, I'll give you some points. See, a democratic government, see, first you have to explain democratic government. Yes, it is a legitimate government. Why? Number one, it may be slow, it may be less efficient, or it may not always be, that responsive or clean, but it is people's own government. So a democratic government, the very introduction you're going to give is, it's people's own government. Second, if I talk about this democratic government, see, there is I'll show you. See, there are free and fair elections that take place. Then there is regular public debates that we hold. Then there is right to information to the citizens. Legitimate, it's fair. Then there is planned legislation at the same time. That means in a democracy, decisions they are taken in a very legitimate means in the decisions are taken in a very transparent manner by the citizens, and they have a chance to examine the process of that decision making. I'll repeat once again. So legitimate government means, the decisions they are taken in a very transparent manner by the citizens. And they have every right, they get a chance to examine the process of decision making. Good to go? Okay. And guys, how can you say that if somebody asks you, how can you say that, democracy or democratic government is better than any other form of government? Like democratic government is better than any other form of government. Yes, because democratic is not a mere form of government. Let me put it clear. It's not a mere form of government. It is a form of society. It is a form of society. It is a form of social order. And it is always, I would say, preferred, or it is always preferable and superior to any other form of government. Why? Because number one, it promotes equality among the citizens. In democracy, each citizen is given equal right, freedom, and there is no discrimination. Whatsoever the case may be, there is no discrimination on the basis of caste, color, religion. So democracy aims at equitable distribution of income and products. Second important point, it enhances dignity of individuals. That means democracy permits, political equality among the citizens. In democracy, there is absence of any domination and conflict. We try to bring it down. This implies that every citizen has, enjoys dignity and freedom in democracy. Then, third important point, it improves the quality of decision making. As I would say, as democracy is based on the policy of deliberation or maybe negotiation, so it improves quality of decision making. In a democracy, every citizen takes part in the decision making process, may it be directly, may it be indirectly, through the elected representatives, but anyway, it helps improve the decision making. And I would also say that democracy develops competitive attitude, by which I would say it develops a procedure to conduct competition among the different political parties. So this sort of reduces the conflicts or maybe social tension that might become more explosive or violent. I'll talk about two more important points. That it involves a mechanism to negotiate. No society can fully or permanently resolve conflict among different groups. But we certainly learn in democracy to respect the differences or maybe evolve a mechanism to negotiate on those differences. So, democracies are the best suited to produce this outcome. Then it represents the general view. the majority always needs to work with the minority so that the government can function to represent, and it can function to represent the general view. And the last important point is we've talked about it provides an accountable, responsive, and legitimate government. So the most basic feature of democracy is that it produces a government which is accountable to the citizens, responsive to their needs, and also, stands up to the expectations of the citizens. So I'll give you a minute so that you can quickly revise whatever we've written or covered, all the important points. I'll speak up the point once again. So it promotes equality. Second important point, it enhances the dignity of individuals. Third, improves the quality of decision making. Then develops a competent attitude, especially among the political parties. Then it helps to, create an atmosphere of negotiation. It evolves a mechanism where people can negotiate. It represents a general view, and also it is an accountable, responsive, and legitimate form of government. So on that note, let's proceed to the next question, that is, any three features of democracy. We've discussed a lot, I believe. On that note, we've discussed a lot of features. So they hold regular elections, there is right to vote, there are political parties, there is also rule of law. So we just discussed all these important points, and you can, talk about any one of them. Just in case one of them means in case you have a question that is for 1 mark. Anyway, if this question comes for 3 marks, you have to come up with all these points. Then let's proceed to the next question, and the basic important question from the chapter Outcomes of Democracy. The three major challenges faced by modern democracies. So yes, it's three important challenges. We know it's easy to answer. The first one is going to be the foundational challenge. That means you have to ensure that if there's a non-democratic setup, it gets a transition to a democratic setup. So that is the foundational challenge. That is, first let me tell you what are the three challenges. First is foundational. Second is going to be the challenge of expansion of democracy. You have to expand democracy. And then it's deepening of democracy. So this is a very important question from this chapter. So let's look into the points. The very first is making a transition from institutions, bringing the non-democratic regime down, and then establishing a democratic setup, keeping the military away, and establishing a sovereign and a functional state. I hope it is pretty clear. That's foundational. Like you go transition from one, non-democratic setup to a democratic setup. Second important point is you have to ensure that there is expansion. That means even the less empowered section, may be women, may be minority, really feel empowered. That we are a part of this game. Third important point is challenge of deepening of democracy. That means you have to ensure that the wealthy people do not influence the decisions. It's like every general section, it gets empowered, it gets involved into the decision making. So I guess we guys are pretty much done, and we've covered all the important questions from political science. So I hope this this video was useful to you, because I tried to cover important aspects from every chapter. So till we meet next, take care, stay healthy, stay hydrated, and most important, study hard and do respect your parents, guys. So bye bye, take care, thank you.